In this video, I just wanted to give a tour or an overview of Canine, talk about why you'd want to use it, why it's helpful, and if you have, it's not going to go through, it's already set up, so it's not going to go through the setup instructions. If you need something like that, I have a separate video for that, so I'll post a link to that in this video. But you can see here, I already have a project set up. I have this whiteboarder project, and I already have it mapped to DNS. So this is live on the internet. Anybody could see it. And all it is it's a collaborative whiteboarder. So this is a unique URL. If you refresh the page, it's all saved. And so this is a place where multiple people can use this URL to basically draw, whatever they want, whatever is useful. And I built this in Rust. It's very low, doesn't use much memory, so it's pretty good as like a demo application. And so coming back to Canine here, you can see this should look pretty familiar if you've ever used something like Heroku or Render or Fly. It basically turns your Kubernetes environment into a little platform as a service, right? So this is a much more like streamlined, developer-friendly way of deploying applications into your Kubernetes cluster. So I'll hit deploy here just to show you what that looks like. And so you can see here what happened is it is logging into, it basically authenticated with my credentials that I've uploaded. It then builds a Docker image, uploads the Docker image to, in this case, GitHub container registry, and then it runs the deployment. And so I could take a look at the history of all deployments. You can see it was first deployed 22 days ago. You could see deployment failures. There's also automated deployments, so we'll talk about that later. But that's if you want auto deployments to happen whenever some branch changes. So on the GitHub side, this is what that looks like. This is the repository that it's deploying from, and this is the branch on that repository. And you can see here that Canine automatically sets up a webhook so that it could get notifications for updates to the project. If you're running a private Canine installation, Canine will actually automatically detect that and then just poll. So it'll basically check once a minute to see if there's any new updates. So this will work. This auto deployment will work. You can see that here, auto deployment. That'll work regardless of whether or not you have a private installation where it's accessible to the internet, or if it's just on, if it's actually accessible to the internet. So over here, we can take a look at how this project was configured. You can see that this application is just running a single service called web. And all it does is it exposes a single container port at port 3000. And it does allow public networking. There's a single replica. And down here, you could see how the networking is defined. So in this case, I basically have a single URL for this, and this is the DNS mapping that I've already created before this video in Cloudflare. So that's quite easy to do. I'll come back up to the top here, and I'll show you these environment variables. So obviously, like if you've ever used anything like this, you can set up you can configure environment variables for your application to be able to consume. In this case, if I go back here, in this case, everything I draw here, it's just saved to Redis as a base64 URL. So in this case, you can see here, if I do this reveal, I have a Redis URL. And this Redis URL is actually hosted also within Canine, within your Kubernetes cluster. And I'll show you that in a second here. We can then hop over to take a look at the processes. So here you could see these are the logs. And so you can see any issues with startup. This is the logs that Kubernetes produces when it's actually trying to schedule your pod or your application into the cluster. And these are live logs that are basically being streamed. And you can see that some of the requests that I made will show up here. The other thing here is that if you wanted to open up a shell to your cluster, so if you wanted to open up like a bash shell, for instance, to be able to run certain commands, you can just click on this, and you'll have to copy this into a terminal. But basically, you can treat this effectively, this kubeconfig file, as effectively a short-lived SSH key. And then you could just run this command to be able to open up a bash shell against this running, you could think about this running process. If you don't want to open up a bash shell against your actual web process, but you want to create a different one, you can just click here to create a one-off pod. And then you can then connect, whenever this is ready, you can then connect to this one. And so this is very helpful for being able to get a shell in production or in your environment so that you can basically test different things. The last tab here is the metrics. So like I said, you can see very low memory usage, only 3 megabytes. And this is an application that I just deployed, but over time you'll see historical CPU usage and memory usage start populating here. So I'll come down here and I'll show you some of the, I spoke earlier about Redis. So Canine also is fully integrated with Helm, which is a way of installing third-party packages to your Kubernetes cluster. So in this case, I can click on a new add-on, and this is just for demo, but I'll say, you can say something like Redis main, that's what I did here, and you can give it some amount of storage and you can create the add-on. But if what you're looking for doesn't show up in one of these pre-built add-ons, you can just basically search for your own chart. So in this case, if I wanted to deploy Dagster, you could see that this is the Dagster project, and I can select this, and then I could deploy that into my cluster. So there's something like 15,000 different third-party applications that you can self-host completely free. You just have to pay for the compute within your own cluster. So coming here to my live Redis, you can see it manages the storage usage. It also, here's the connection URL. So this is what I referenced back here in the environment variable. This is the same URL as here. And so I'm basically self-hosting both the Redis instance and the application in the same cluster. So I'm not paying for an extra service for this at all. You can then see I also have the same thing. I could see the processes that are running for this Redis, and then also memory usage. And down here you could see this is the more advanced configuration. So if you have some experience with Helm, this should look familiar to you, but otherwise typically what you get from just creating it here is usually fine. So the next thing I'll show you is what a typical, CI/CD workflow would look like with Canine. In this case, I have the whiteboarder app brought up, and the only thing I'll change here, I'll actually just change this little thing at the bottom. So in the application itself, you can see that it says version 1.0.15, right? And that's all I'll change. I'll just bump it up to that. And then I will say bump version. And obviously, if you were actually developing things, you're probably not using github.dev. You're probably doing it locally on VS Code or Cursor, pushing the changes up, and then probably submitting a pull request and stuff like this. In this case, I'm just going to push straight to main, and we'll take a look at what happens on the Canine side. So you can see my change has already been detected. This is very quick because this is integrated through a webhook. And you can see the same process happens. It goes through building a Docker container and then uploading that container image and then automatically deploying that to my application. So this is still pending. One thing you'll notice here, you can see that it deleted that one-off pod that we created earlier, because now that one-off pod is actually stale. The code in it has been changed since. And so these are just basically sensible things that Canine does on your behalf that in a different world you'd have to write all the Kubernetes YAML configs and whatnot to be able to support this. So coming back to this process, you can see that this just restarted. If I take a look at the logs, you could see it's basically restarted the application. And if I come take a look at the application, you could see it's all back up again. Within a service, if it's a web service, so I'll show you here. There are 3 types of services: web services, background workers, and cron jobs. For a web service, you have the option of specifying a health check URL. What this is used for is for zero downtime deployments. So Kubernetes will basically, as part of a deployment, it will run a blue-green deploy. It'll make sure that the new application, the new version that's being deployed, the health check is live before it spins down the old one. And in addition to that, Canine will actually automatically, through Kubernetes, be constantly polling this health check endpoint URL so that if the service ever went down, this healthy would become unhealthy. There's also background workers. So this is just basically what you would use to configure something like a Kafka queue, something like a, if you've done Rails, it would be Sidekick. If you've used Django, it would probably be something like Celery. But for background tasks that don't expose a port. And then the last thing is a cron job. In this case, I'll do a quick demo of a cron job. This will basically be a cron job that runs once per minute, and all it does is it runs the ls command. So it's not doing all that much, and I'll just call it cron. I'll actually go ahead and create this. And you can see it says runs every minute of every hour of every day. And this time I want to deploy it, but I actually don't need to rebuild the container image. I mean, I could, but if I want a faster deployment, I could just deploy without rebuilding, in which case it would just basically skip the build itself and apply the changes to the actual Kubernetes cluster. And I could do that because I didn't actually change any code this time. All I did was add a new service. Now if I come back to services, you'll be able to see that over time, this cron job, over the next couple minutes, this cron job will start running, and Canine will automatically show you the success, basically green or red, so success or failed, of that cron job that's running. So you can see I've waited for about a minute, and now there's this little red icon, a little green icon, and that basically just means that a cron job successfully ran and it took about 3 seconds to run. And so this will slowly populate over time as more and more jobs run, and in this case, obviously, it's running every minute, so we would expect a lot of these to start filling out over time. The last thing I'll show you here is if you take a look at, actually, maybe it's easier to access from here, you can take a look at the local cluster here. So if I click on that, this is the actual cluster that's running within. And you can see it's fully integrated with Portainer. So instead of connecting to the cluster directly, I'm connecting to it through Portainer. The benefit of this is that it allows me to leverage all of the permissioning that the Portainer endpoints can provide, so that, for instance, if my user, for instance, has no permissions to access this cluster, then through Portainer, it would ensure that. So then I would make sure to not accidentally do something that I'm not allowed to. So all of that can be configured, obviously, on the Portainer side. And on the Canine side, you can log in with your Portainer credentials for all of that to just flow through seamlessly. The last thing I'll show you here is this download all YAMLs file. This is for the case if you ever want to see under the hood what Canine is doing on your behalf. So there's no vendor lock-in, there's nothing hidden, all of this is open source. And if you click on this, you could see that this will just download all the YAML files that Canine uses to create both this Redis instance and your project. And from there, if there ever comes a day where you need to move off of Canine, or if you just want to understand better kind of what Canine is doing under the hood, it's very easy to just basically download this and take a look and copy it to your own project if you need to.